Ahoy! It's me again, Ron Gabaldon, here with part 4 of Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. In part 3, Howard W. Campbell Jr. had a whirlwind romantic reunion with a woman claiming to be his dead ex-wife, Helga Noth. He also tells the story of how he stole a motorcycle from his best friend. And finally, he has a decidedly violent confrontation with Bernard B. O'Hare, the American soldier who captured Howard outside of Ohrdruf in Germany back in World War II. Part 4 is coming up, and in true Vonnegut style, stuff's gonna go real sideways. My earlier greeting is technically correct because I am on a watercraft, and this is a maritime post. So, enjoy.
Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. Part 4, Chapters 27 through 32. Read by Ron Gabaldon. Chapter 27. Finders Keepers. My research assistants here, lively, keen, young people, have provided me with a photostat of a story in the New York Times telling of the death of Laszlo Zsombathy, the man who killed himself with the rope intended for me. So I didn't dream that either. Zsombathy did the big trick the night after I was beaten up. He had come to this country after being a freedom fighter against the Russians in Hungary, according to the Times. He was a fratricide, according to the Times, having shot his brother Miklos, second Minister of Education in Hungary. Before he gave himself the big sleep, Zsombathy wrote a note and pinned it to his trouser leg. There was nothing in the note about his having killed his brother. His complaint was that he had been a respected veterinarian in Hungary, but that he was not permitted to practice in America. He had bitter things to say about freedom in America. He thought it was illusory. And in a final fandango of paranoia and masochism, Zsombathy closed his note with a hint that he knew how to cure cancer. American doctors laughed at him, he said, whenever he tried to tell them how. So much for Zsombathy. As for the room where I awakened after my beating, it was the cellar that had been furnished for the iron guard of the white sons of the American Constitution by the late August Craptower, the cellar of Dr. Lionel J.D. Jones, DDS, DD. Somewhere upstairs, a printing press was running, turning out copies of the White Christian Minuteman. From some other chamber in the cellar, partly soundproofed, came the idiotically monotonous banging of target practice. After my beating, I had been given first aid by young Dr. Abraham Epstein, the doctor in my building who had pronounced Craptower dead. From Epstein's apartment, Resi had called Dr. Jones for help and advice. "Why Jones?" I said. "He was the only person in this country I knew I could trust," said Resi. "He was the only person I knew for sure was on our side." "What is life without friends?" I said. I have no recollection of it, but Resi tells me that I regained consciousness in Epstein's apartment. Jones picked Resi and me up in his limousine, took me to a hospital where I was x-rayed. I had 3 broken ribs taped up. After that, I was taken to Jones' cellar and bedded down. "Why here?" I said. "It's safe," said Resi. "From what?" I said. "The Jews," she said. The Black Fuhrer of Harlem, Jones' chauffeur, now came in with a tray of eggs, toast, and scalding coffee. He set it down on a table for me. "Headache?" he asked me. "Yes," I said. "Take a aspirin," he said. "Thank you for the advice," I said. "Most things in this world don't work," he said, "but aspirin do." "The Republic of Israel really wants me," I said to Resi in groping disbelief. To try me for what the paper said?" "Dr. Jones says the American government won't let you go," said Resi, "but that the Jews will send men to kidnap you, the way they did Adolf Eichmann." "Such a piffling prisoner," I murmured. "Ain't like just having a Jew here and a Jew there after you," said the Black Fuhrer. "What?" I said. "I mean," he said, "they got a country now. I mean, they got Jewish battleships. They got Jewish airplanes. They got Jewish tanks. They got Jewish everything out after you but a Jewish hydrogen bomb." "Who in God's name is doing that shooting?" I said. "Can't he stop until my head feels a little better?" "That's your friend," said Resi. "Dr. Jones?" I said. "George Kraft," she said. "Kraft?" I said. "What's he doing here?" "He's coming with us," said Resi. "To where?" I said. "It's all been decided," said Resi. "Everybody agrees, darling. The best thing is for us to get out of the country. Dr. Jones has made arrangements." "What sort of arrangements?" I said. "He has a friend with an airplane. As soon as you're well enough, darling, we get on that plane, fly to some divine place where you aren't known, and we'll start life all over again." Chapter 28. Target. I went to see George Kraft, there in Jones' basement. I found him standing at the head of a long corridor, the far end of which was packed with sandbags. Pinned to the sandbags was a target in the shape of a man. The target was a caricature of a cigar-smoking Jew. The Jew was standing on broken crosses and little naked women. In one hand, the Jew held a bag of money labeled International Banking. In the other hand, he held a Russian flag. From the pockets of his suit, little fathers, mothers, and children in scale with the naked women under his feet cried out for mercy. All these details were not evident from the far end of the shooting gallery, but it wasn't necessary for me to approach the target in order to know about them. I had drawn the target in about 1941. Millions of copies of the target were run off in Germany. It had so delighted my superiors that I was given a bonus of a 10-pound ham, 30 gallons of gasoline, and a week's all-expenses-paid vacation for my wife and myself at the Schreiber House in Riesengebirge. I must admit that this target represents an excess of zeal, since I was not working as a graphic artist for the Nazis. I offer it in evidence against myself. I presume my authorship of it is news even to the Haifa Institute for the Documentation of War Criminals. I submit, however, that I drew the monster in order to establish myself even more solidly as a Nazi. I overdrew it, with an effect that would have been ludicrous anywhere but in Germany or Jones' basement, and I drew it far more amateurishly than I can really draw. It succeeded nonetheless. I was flabbergasted by its success. The Hitler Youth and SS recruits fired at almost nothing else, and I even got a letter of thanks for the targets from Heinrich Himmler. "It has improved my marksmanship 100%, he wrote. "What pure Aryan can look at that wonderful target," he said, "and not shoot to kill?" Watching Kraft pop away at that target, I understood its popularity for the first time. The amateurishness of it made it look like something drawn on the wall of a public lavatory. It recalled the stink, diseased twilight, humid resonance, and vile privacy of a stall in a public lavatory. Echoed exactly the soul's condition in a man at war. I had drawn better than I knew. Kraft, oblivious to me in my leopard skin, fired again. He was using a Luger as big as a siege howitzer. It was chambered and bored for mere 22s, however, making anticlimactic pee-wee bangs. Kraft fired again, and a sandbag 2 feet to the left of the target's head bled sand. "Try opening your eyes next time you fire," I said. "Oh," he said, putting the pistol down. "You're up and around." "Yes," I said. "Too bad for what happened," he said. "I thought so," I said. "Maybe it's for the best, though," he said. "Maybe we'll all wind up thanking God it happened." "How so?" I said. "It's jarred us out of our ruts," he said. "That's for certain," I said. "When you get out of this country with your girl, get yourself new surroundings, a new identity, you'll start writing again," he said, "and you'll write 10 times better than you ever did before. Think of the maturity you'll bring to your writing." "My head aches too much just now," I said. "It'll stop aching soon," he said. "It isn't broken, and it's filled with a heartbreakingly clear understanding of the self and the world." I said. "And I'm going to be a better painter for the change, too," he said. "I've never seen the tropics before. That brutal glut of color, that visible, audible heat." "What's this about the tropics?" I said. "I thought that's where we'd go," he said. "That's where Resi wants to go, too." "You're coming too?" I said. "Do you mind?" he said. "People have certainly been active while I slept," I said. "Was that wrong of us?" said Kraft. "Did we plan anything that would be bad for you?" "George," I said, "why should you throw in your lot with us? Why should you come down into this cellar with the black beetles, too? You have no enemies. Stay with us, George, and you'll deserve every enemy I have." He put his hand on my shoulder, looked deep into my eyes. "Howard," he said, "when my wife died, I had no allegiance to anything on earth. I, too, was a meaningless fragment of a nation of two. And then I discovered something I had never known before. What a true friend was," he said. "I throw my lot in with you gladly, friend. Nothing else interests me. Nothing else attracts me in the least. With your permission, my paints and I would like nothing better than to go with you wherever fate takes you next." This is friendship indeed," I said. "I hope so," he said. Chapter 29. Adolf Eichmann and Me. I spent 2 days in that queer basement as a meditative invalid. My clothes had been ruined in the beating I'd taken, so from the resources of Jones' household, I was given other clothes. I was given a pair of shiny black trousers by Father Keeley, a silver-colored shirt by Dr. Jones, a shirt that had once been part of the uniform of a defunct American fascist movement called, straightforwardly enough, the Silver Shirts. And the Black Fuhrer gave me a tiny orange sports coat that made me look like an organ grinder's monkey. And Resi Noth and George Kraft kept me company tenderly, not only nursed me, but did my dreaming and planning for me as well. The big dream was to get out of America as soon as possible. Conversations in which I took very little part were a sort of roulette played with the names of warm places purported to be Edens: Acapulco, Minorca, Rhodes, even the Vale of Kashmir, Zanzibar, and the Andaman Islands. The news from the outside world was not such as to make my remaining in America attractive, or even conceivable. Father Keeley went out and brought newspapers several times a day, and for supplementary enlightenment, We had the blatting of the radio. The Republic of Israel stepped up its demands for me, encouraged by rumors that I wasn't an American citizen, that I was, in fact, a citizen of nowhere. And the Republic's demands were framed so as to be educational, too, teaching that a propagandist of my sort was as much a murderer as Heydrich, Eichmann, Himmler, or any of the gruesome rest. That may be so. I had hoped, as a broadcaster, to be merely ludicrous. But this is a hard world to be ludicrous in, with so many human beings so reluctant to laugh, so incapable of thought, so eager to believe and snarl and hate. So many people wanted to believe me. Say what you will about the sweet miracle of unquestioning faith. I consider a capacity for it terrifying and absolutely vile. West Germany asked the government of the United States politely if I might be a citizen of theirs. They had no proof one way or another, since all records pertaining to me had been burned during the war. If I was a citizen of theirs, they said, they would be pleased as Israel to have me for trial. If I was a German, they said in effect, they were certainly ashamed of a German like me. Soviet Russia, in short words that sounded like ball bearings being dropped onto wet gravel, said that no trial was necessary. A fascist like me, they said, should be squashed underfoot like a cockroach. But it was the anger of my neighbors that really stank of sudden death. The more barbaric newspapers printed without comment letters from people who wanted me displayed from coast to coast in an iron cage. From heroes who volunteered to serve in a firing squad for me, as though the use of small arms were a skill known to few. From people who planned to do nothing themselves, but were confident enough in American civilization to know that there were other, stronger, younger people who would know what to do. And these last-named patriots were right in having confidence. I doubt if there has ever been a society that has been without strong and young people eager to experiment with homicide, provided no very awful penalties are attached to it. According to the newspapers and radio, justifiably angry people had already done what they could about me, breaking into my ratty attic, smashing my windows, tearing up or carting off my worldly goods. The hated attic was now under police guard around the clock. The New York Post pointed out editorially that the police could scarce give me the protection I needed, since my enemies were so numerous and so understandably murderous. What was called for, said the Post helplessly, was a battalion of Marines to surround me for the rest of my days. The New York Daily News suggested that my biggest war crime was not killing myself like a gentleman. Presumably, Hitler was a gentleman. The News, incidentally, also printed a letter from Bernard B. O'Hare, the man who had captured me in Germany, the man who had recently written me a letter with copious carbons. "I want this guy all for myself," O'Hare wrote of me. "I deserve this guy all for myself. I was the guy who caught him in Germany. If I'd known then he was going to get away, I would have blown his head off right then and there. If anybody sees Campbell before I do, tell him Bernie O'Hare is on his way from Boston by non-stop plane." The New York Times said that tolerating and even protecting vermin like me was one of the maddening necessities in the life of a truly free society. The United States government, as Resi had told me, was not going to turn me over to the Republic of Israel. There was no legal machinery for that. The United States government did promise, however, to make a full and open review of my puzzling case, to find out exactly what my citizenship status was, to find out why I had never even been brought to trial. That government expressed queasy surprise that I was even within its borders. The New York Times published a portrait of me as a much younger man. my official portrait as a Nazi and idol of the international airwaves. I can only guess at the year in which the picture was taken. 1941, I think. Arndt Klopfer, the photographer who took the picture of me, did his best to make me look like a Maxfield Parrish Jesus covered in cold cream. He even gave me a halo, a judiciously placed spot of nebulous light in the background. The halo was no special effect for me alone. Everybody who went to Klopfer got a halo, including Adolf Eichmann. I can say that for certain about Eichmann, without asking for confirmation from the Haifa Institute, because Eichmann had his picture taken just ahead of me at Klopfer's studio. It was the only time I ever met Eichmann, the only time in Germany. I met him again here in Israel only 2 weeks ago, when I was incarcerated briefly in Tel Aviv. About that reunion, I was locked up in Tel Aviv for 24 hours. On my way to my cell there, the guards stopped me outside Eichmann's cell to hear what we had to say to each other, if anything. We didn't recognize each other, and the guards had to introduce us. Eichmann was writing the story of his life, just as I am now writing the story of my life. That chinless old plucked buzzard, with 6 million murders to explain away, gave me a saintly smile. He was sweetly interested in his work, in me, in the guards, in the prison, in everybody. He beamed at me, and he said, "I'm not mad at anybody." "That's certainly the way to be," I said. "I've got some advice for you," he said. "I'd be glad to have it," I said. "Relax," he said, beaming, beaming, beaming. "Just relax." "That's how I got here," I said. "Life is divided up into phases," he said. "Each one is very different from the others, and you have to be able to recognize what is expected of you in each phase. That's the secret of successful living." "It's good of you to share the secret with me," I said. "I'm a writer now," he said. "I never thought I'd be a writer." "May I ask a personal question?" I said. "Certainly," he said benignly. "That's the phase I'm in now. This is the time for thinking and answering. Ask whatever you'd like." "Do you feel that you're guilty of murdering 6 million Jews?" I said. "Absolutely not," said the architect of Auschwitz, the introducer of conveyor belts into crematoria, the greatest customer in the world for the gas called Cyclone B. Not knowing the man for sure, I tried some intramural satire on him. What seemed to me to be intramural satire. "You were simply a soldier, were you?" I said, "taking orders from higher-ups like soldiers around the world." Eichmann turned to a guard and talked to him in rapid-fire Yiddish, indignant Yiddish. If he'd spoken it slowly, I would have understood it, but he spoke too fast. "What did he say?" I asked the guard.
"He wondered if we'd showed you his statement," said the guard. "He made us promise not to show it to anybody until it was done."
"I haven't seen it," I said to Eichmann.
"Then how do you know what my defense is going to be?"
he said. This man actually believed that he had invented his own trite defense, though a whole nation of 90-some-odd million had made the same defense before him. Such was his paltry understanding of the godlike human act of invention. The more I think about Eichmann and me, the more I think that he should be sent to the hospital, and that I am the sort of person for whom punishments by fair, just men were devised. As a friend of the court that will try Eichmann, I offer my opinion that Eichmann cannot distinguish between right and wrong, that not only right and wrong, but truth and falsehood, hope and despair, beauty and ugliness, kindness and cruelty, comedy and tragedy, are all processed by Eichmann's mind indiscriminately, like birdshot through a bugle. My case is different. I always know when I tell a lie, am capable of imagining the cruel consequences of anybody's believing my lies. No cruelty is wrong. I could no more lie without noticing it than I could unknowingly pass a kidney stone. If there is another life after this one, I would like very much, in the next one, to be the sort of person of whom it could truly be said, "Forgive him. He knows not what he does." This cannot be said of me now. The only advantage to me of knowing the difference between right and wrong, as nearly as I can tell, is that I can sometimes laugh when the Eichmanns can see nothing funny. "You still write?" Eichmann asked me, there in Tel Aviv. "One last project," I said. "A command performance for the archives."
You are a professional writer, he said.
"Some say so," I said.
"Tell me," he said, "do you set a certain time of day aside for writing, whether you feel like it or not? Or do you wait for inspiration to strike, night or day?"
"A schedule," I said, remembering back so many years. I got some of his respect back.
Yes,
He said, nodding.
a schedule. That's what I've found too. Sometimes I simply stare at a blank sheet of paper, but I still sit here and stare at it for the whole period I've set aside for work. Does alcohol help?
"I think it only seems to, and only seems to for about a half an hour," I said. This, too, was an opinion from my youth. Eichmann made a joke.
"Listen," he said, "about those 6 million.
"Yes," I said.
I could spare a few for your book," he said. "I don't think I really need them all."
I offer this joke to history, on the assumption that no tape recorder was around. This was one of the memorable quips of the bureaucratic Genghis Khan. It's possible that Eichmann wanted me to recognize that I had killed a lot of people too, by the exercise of my fat mouth. But I doubt that he was that subtle a man of as many parts as he was. I think, if we ever got right down to it, that out of the 6 million murders generally regarded as his, he wouldn't lend me so much as one. If he were to start farming out all those murders after all, Eichmann, as Eichmann's idea of Eichmann, would disappear. The guards took me away, and the only other encounter I had with the man of the century was in the form of a note smuggled mysteriously from his prison in Tel Aviv to mine in Jerusalem. The note was dropped at my feet by a person unknown in the exercise yard here. I picked it up, read it, and this is what it said.
"Do you think a literary agent is absolutely necessary?"
The note was signed by Eichmann. My reply was this: for book club and movie sales in the United States of America, absolutely. Chapter 30. Don Quixote. We would fly to Mexico City, Kraft, Resi, and I. That became the plan. Dr. Jones would not only provide us with transportation, he would provide us with a reception committee in Mexico City as well. From Mexico City, we would go exploring by automobile, would seek some secret village in which to spend the rest of our days. The plan was surely as charming a daydream as I had had in many a day, and it seemed not only possible but certain that I would write again. Shyly, I told Resi so. She wept for joy. For real joy? Who knows? I can only guarantee that the tears were wet and salty.
"Did I have anything to do with this heavenly miracle?" she said.
"Everything," I said, holding her close.
No, very little," she said. "But some, thank God, some. The big miracle is the talent you were born with."
"The big miracle," I said, is your power to raise the dead. Love does that, she said, and it raised me too. How alive do you think I was before? Shall I write about it? I said. In our village, there in Mexico, on the rim of the Pacific? Is that what I should write first? Yes, yes, oh yes, darling, darling, she said. I will take such good care of you while you do it. Will you have any time for me? The afternoons and the evenings and the nights, I said. That's all the time I'll be able to give you. Have you decided on a new name yet? She said. Name? I said. Your new name. The name of the writer whose beautiful works will come mysteriously out of Mexico, she said. I will be Mrs. Signora, I said. Signora who? She said. Signor and Signora who? Christen us, I said. It's too important for me to decide right away, she said. Kraft came in at this point. Resi asked him to suggest a pseudonym for me.
What about Don Quixote? He said. That, he said to Resi, would make you Dulcinea del Toboso, and I would sign my paintings Sancho Panza.
Dr. Jones now came in with Father Keeley.
The plane will be ready tomorrow morning, he said. You're sure you'll be well enough to travel?
I'm well enough right now, I said.
The man who'll meet you in Mexico City is Arndt Klopfer, said Jones. Can you remember that?
The photographer? I said.
You know him?
He took my official photograph in Berlin, I said.
He's the biggest brewer in Mexico now, said Jones.
For God's sake, I said. The last I heard, his studio got hit with a 500-pound bomb.
You can't keep a good man down, said Jones. Now then, Father Keeley and I have a special request to make of you.
Oh, I said.
Tonight is the weekly meeting of the Iron Guard of the White Sons of the Constitution, said Jones. Father Keeley and I want to stage some sort of memorial service for August Craptower.
I see, I said.
Father Keeley and I don't think we could deliver a eulogy without breaking down, said Jones. It would be a terrible emotional ordeal for either one of us. We wonder if you, a very famous speaker, a man with a golden tongue, if I may say so, we were wondering if you would accept the honor of saying a few words.
I could hardly refuse. Thank you, gentlemen, I said. A eulogy?
Father Keeley thought up a general theme, if that would help, said Jones.
It would help a lot, a general theme would, I said. I could certainly use one. Father Keeley cleared his throat.
I think the theme should be,
that addled old cleric said,
His truth goes marching on.
Chapter 31. His truth goes marching on. The Iron Guard of the White Sons of the American Constitution assembled on ranks of folding chairs in the furnace room of Dr. Jones' basement. The guardsmen were 20 in number, ranging in age from 16 to 20. They were all blond. They were all over 6 feet tall. They were neatly dressed, wore suits and white shirts and neckties. All that identified them as guardsmen was a little piece of gold ribbon run through the buttonhole of the right lapel of each. I would not have noticed this odd detail of buttonholes on the right lapels that conventionally have no buttonholes, if Dr. Jones hadn't pointed it out to me.
It's a way they have of identifying each other, even though the ribbon isn't worn, he said. They can see their ranks growing, he said, without anybody else noticing it.
They all have to take their coats to tailors and insist on buttonholes in the right lapel, I said.
The mothers do it,
said Father Keeley. Keeley, Jones, Resi, and I were sitting on a raised platform facing the guardsmen, our backs to the furnace. Resi was on the platform because she had agreed to say a few words to the boys about her first-hand experiences with communism behind the Iron Curtain.
"Most tailors are Jews," said Dr. Jones. "We don't want to tip our hand."
"Besides," said Father Keeley, "it's good for the mothers to participate." Jones' chauffeur, the Black Fuhrer of Harlem, was now on the platform with us, hanging a big canvas sign behind us, tying its grommeted ends to steam pipes. This is what it said: "Get plenty of education. Lead your class in all things. Keep your body clean and strong. Keep your opinions to yourself." "These are neighborhood kids?" I asked Jones.
"Oh, no," said Jones. "Only 8 of them are even from New York City. 9 are from New Jersey, 2 are from Peekskill, the twins, and 1 comes all the way from Philadelphia."
"Every week he comes from Philadelphia?" I said.
"Where else can he get what August Kreptower was offering here?" said Jones.
"How were they recruited?" I said.
"Through my paper," said Jones. "But they really recruited themselves. Worried, conscientious parents were writing to the White Christian Minutemen all the time, asking me if there wasn't some sort of youth movement that wanted to keep the American bloodstream pure. One of the most heartbreaking letters I ever saw was from a woman in Bernardsville, New Jersey. She'd let her boy go to the Boy Scouts of America, not knowing that the true name of the BSA ought to be the Boogies and Semites of America. And the boy got to be an Eagle Scout, and then he went into the army, went over to Japan, and came home with a Japanese wife."
"When August Kreptower read that letter, he cried," said Father Keeley. "That's when he knew, tired as he was, he had to get back to working with youth again." Father Keeley called the meeting to order, had us all pray. His prayer was a conventional one, asking for courage in the face of hostile hosts. There was one unconventional touch, however, a touch I had never heard of before, even in Germany. The Black Fuhrer stood over a kettle drum in the back of the room. The drum was muffled as it happened, by the simulated leopard skin I had worn earlier for a bathrobe. At the end of each sentence in the prayer, the Black Fuhrer gave the muffled drum a thump. Resi's talk on the horrors of life behind the Iron Curtain was brief and dull, and so unsatisfactory from an educational standpoint that Jones had to prompt her.
"Most devoted communists are of Jewish or Oriental blood, aren't they?" he asked her.
"What?" she said.
"Of course they are," said Jones. "It goes without saying," he said, and he dismissed her rather curtly.
Where was George Kraft? He was sitting in the audience, in the very last row, next to the muffled kettle drum. Jones introduced me next, introduced me as a man who needed no introduction. He said I wasn't to start talking yet because he had a big surprise for me. He certainly did. The Black Fuhrer left his drum, went to a rheostat by the light switch, and dimmed the lights gradually as Jones talked. Jones told, in the gathering darkness, of the intellectual and moral climate in America during the Second World War. He told of how patriotic, thoughtful white men were persecuted for their ideals, how, finally, almost all the American patriots were rotting in federal dungeons.
"Nowhere could an American find the truth," he said.
The room was pitch dark now.
"Almost nowhere," said Jones in the dark. "If a man was fortunate enough to have a shortwave radio," he said, "there was still one fountainhead of truth. Just one."
It was then, in the darkness, there was a crackle and susurrus of shortwave static, a fragment of French, a fragment of German, a fragment of Brahms' First Symphony, as though played on kazoos, and then, loud and clear, "This is Howard W. Campbell, Jr., one of the few remaining free Americans, speaking to you from free Berlin. I wish to welcome my countrymen, which is to say the native white Gentiles of the 106th Division, taking up positions before St. Vith tonight. To the parents of the boys in this green division, may I say that the area is presently a quiet one. The 442nd and 444th Regiments are one line, the 423rd in reserve. There is a fine article in the current Reader's Digest with the title, "There Are No Atheists in Foxholes." I should like to expand this theme a little and tell you that, even though this is a war inspired by the Jews, a war that only the Jews can win, there are no Jews in foxholes either. The riflemen in the 106th can tell you that. The Jews are all too busy counting merchandise in the Quartermaster Corps, or money in the Finance Corps, or selling black market cigarettes and nylons in Paris to ever come closer to the front than 100 miles. You folks at home, you parents and relatives of boys at the front, I want you to think of all the Jews you know. I want you to think hard about them. Now then, let me ask you, is the war making them richer or poorer? Do they eat better or worse than you do? Do they seem to have more or less gasoline than you do? I already know what the answers to all those questions are, and so will you if you open your eyes and think hard for a minute. Now, let me ask you this. Do you know of a single Jewish family that has received a telegram from Washington, once the capital of a free people? Do you know of a single Jewish family that has received a telegram from Washington that begins, "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son," and so on? There were 15 minutes of Howard W. Campbell, Jr., the free American, there in basement darkness. I do not mean to suppress my infamy with a casual "and so on." The Haifa Institute for the Documentation of War Criminals has recordings of every broadcast Howard W. Campbell, Jr. ever made. If someone wants to go over those broadcasts, wants to cull from them the very worst things I said, I have no objection to those culls being attached to this account as an appendix. I can hardly deny that I said them. All I can say is that I didn't believe them, that I knew full well what ignorant, destructive, obscenely jocular things I was saying. The experience of sitting there in the dark, hearing the things I'd said, didn't shock me. It might be helpful in my defense to say that I broke into a cold sweat, or some such nonsense. But I've always known what I did. I've always been able to live with what I did. Through that simple and widespread boon to modern mankind, schizophrenia. There was one adventure in the dark worth reporting, though. Somebody put a note in my pocket. Did it with intentional clumsiness, so that I would know the note was there. When the light came on again, I could not guess who had given me the note. I delivered my eulogy of August Kraptower, saying, incidentally, what I pretty much believe, that Kraptower's sort of truth would probably be with mankind forever, as long as there were men and women around who listened to their hearts instead of their minds. I got a nice round of applause from the audience and a drum roll from the Black Fuhrer. I went into the lavatory to read the note. The note was printed on lined paper, torn from a small spiral notebook. This is what it said. "Coal bin door unlocked. Leave at once. I am waiting for you in vacant store directly across street. Urgent. Your life in danger. Eat this." It was signed by my Blue Fairy godmother, by Colonel Frank Weirtanen. Chapter 32. Rosenfield. My lawyer here in Jerusalem, Dr. Alvin Dobrowitz, has told me that I would surely win my case if I could produce one witness who has seen me in the company of the man known to me as Colonel Frank Wirtanen. I met Wirtanen 3 times, before the war, immediately after the war, and finally in the back of a vacant store across the street from the residence of the Reverend Dr. Lionel J.D. Jones, DDS, DD. Only at the first meeting, the meeting on the park bench, did anyone see us together, and those who saw us were no more likely to fix us in their memories than were the squirrels and birds. The second time I met him was in Wiesbaden, Germany, in the dining hall of what had once been an officer's candidate school of the Engineer Corps of the Wehrmacht. There was a great mural on the wall of that dining hall, a tank coming down a lovely, winding country lane. The sun was shining in the mural. The sky was clear. This bucolic scene was about to be shattered. In a thicket, in the foreground of the mural, was a merry little band of steel-helmeted Robin Hoods, engineers whose latest prank was to mine the lane and to implement the impending merriment with an anti-tank gun and a light machine gun. They were so happy. How did I get to Wiesbaden? I was taken from a Third Army prisoner of war pen near Ohrdruf on April 15th, 3 days after my capture by Lieutenant Bernard B. O'Hare. I was driven to Wiesbaden in a jeep, was guarded by a first lieutenant, whose name is unknown to me. We didn't talk much. I did not interest him. He spent the entire trip in a slow, smoldering rage about something that had nothing to do with me. Had he been slighted, insulted, cheated, maligned, grievously misunderstood? I don't know. At any rate, I don't think he would be much help as a witness. He was carrying out orders that bored him. He asked his way to the camp, and then to the dining hall. He left me at the door of the dining hall, told me to go inside and wait, and then he drove off, leaving me unguarded. I went inside, though I might easily have wandered into the countryside again. Inside that melancholy barn, all alone, seated on a table under the mural, was my blue fairy godmother. Wirtanen was wearing the uniform of an American soldier, zippered jacket, olive drab trousers and shirt, the shirt open at the neck, combat boots. He had no weapon. Neither did he wear any symbol of unit or rank. He was a short-legged man. When I saw him sitting there at the table, he was swinging his feet, and his feet were far off the floor. He must have been at least 55 then, 7 years older than when last I'd seen him. He was bald, had put on weight. Colonel Frank Wirtanen had the impudent pink baby look that victory and an American combat uniform seemed to produce in so many older men. He beamed at me, and he shook my hand warmly, and he said, "Well, what did you think of that war, Campbell?" "I would just as soon have stayed out of it," I said. "Congratulations," he said. "You lived through it anyway. A lot of people didn't, you know." "I know," I said. "My wife, for instance." "Sorry about that," he said. "I found out she was missing the same day you did," he said. "How?" I said. "From you," he said. "That was one of the pieces of information you broadcast that night." This news, that I had broadcast the coded announcement of my Helga's disappearance, broadcast it without even knowing what I was doing, somehow upset me more than anything in the whole adventure. It upsets me even now. Why, I don't know. It represented, I suppose, a wider separation of my several selves than even I can bear to think about. At that climactic moment in my life, when I had to suppose that my Helga was dead, I would have liked to mourn as an agonized soul, indivisible, But no. One part of me told the world of the tragedy in code. The rest of me did not even know that the announcement was being made. That was vital military information? That had to be got out of Germany at the risk of my neck? I said to Wirtanen. Certainly, he said. The instant we got it, we began to act. To act? I said, mystified. To act how? To find a replacement for you, said Wirtanen. We thought you'd kill yourself before the sun came up again. I should have, I said. I'm glad that you didn't, he said. I'm damn sorry I didn't, I said. You would think that a man who spent as much time in the theater as I have would know when the proper time came for the hero to die, if he was to be a hero. I snapped my fingers softly. There goes the whole play about Helga and me. Nation of two, I said, because I missed my cue for the great suicide scene. I don't admire suicide, said Wirtanen. I admire form, I said. I admire things with a beginning, a middle, an end, and, whenever possible, a moral too. There's a chance she's still alive, I guess, said Wirtanen. A loose end, I said. An irrelevancy. The play is over. You said something about a moral, he said. If I'd killed myself when you expected me to kill myself, I said, maybe a moral would have occurred to you. I'll have to think, he said. Take your time, I said. I'm not used to things having form, or morals either, he said. If you died, I probably would have said something like, God damn, now what'll we do? A moral? It's a big enough job just burying the dead, without trying to draw a moral from each death, he said. Half the dead don't even have names. I might have said you were a good soldier. Was I? I said. Of all the agents who were my dream children, so to speak, you were the only one who got clear through the war, both reliable and alive, he said. I did a little morbid arithmetic last night, Campbell. Calculated that you, by being neither incompetent nor dead, were 1 in 42. What about the people who fed me information? I said. Dead. All dead, he said. Every one of them a woman, by the way. 7 of them in all. Each one of them, before she was caught, living only to transmit information to you. Think of it, Campbell. 7 women you satisfied again and again and again. And they finally died for the satisfaction that was yours to give them. And not one of them betrayed you either when she was caught. Think of that, too. I can't say you've relieved any shortage of things to think about, I said to Wirtanen. I don't mean to diminish your stature as a teacher and philosopher, but I had things to think about even before this happy reunion. So, what happens to me next? You've already disappeared again, he said. Third Army's been relieved of you, and there'll be no records here to show that you ever arrived. He spread his hands. Where would you like to go from here? And who would you like to be? I don't suppose there's a hero's welcome awaiting me anywhere, I said. Hardly, he said. Any news of my parents? I said. I'm sorry to tell you, he said. They died 4 months ago. Both? I said. Your father first. Your mother 24 hours later. Heart both times, he said. I cried a little about that. Shook my head. Nobody told them what I was really doing? I said. Our radio station in the heart of Berlin was worth more than the peace of mind of 2 old people, he said. I wonder, I said. You're entitled to wonder, he said. I'm not. How many people knew what I was doing? I said. The good things or the bad things? He said. The good, I said. 3 of us, he said. That's all? I said. That's a lot,
he said. Too many, really. There was me, there was General Donovan, and one other. 3 people in all the world knew me for what I was, I said. And all the rest, I shrugged. They knew you for what you were, too, he said abruptly. That wasn't me, I said, startled by his sharpness. Whoever it was, said Wirtanen, he was one of the most vicious sons of bitches who ever lived. I was amazed. Wirtanen was sincerely bitter. You give me hell for that? Knowing what you do? I said. How else could I have survived? That was your problem, he said. Very few men could have solved it as thoroughly as you did. You think I was a Nazi? I said. Certainly you were, he said. How else could a responsible historian classify you? Let me ask you a question. Ask away, I said. If Germany had won, had conquered the world, he stopped, cocked his head. You must be way ahead of me. You must know what the question is. How would I have lived? I said. What would I have felt? What would I have done? Exactly, he said. You must have thought about it, with an imagination like yours. My imagination isn't what it used to be, I said. One of the first things I discovered when I became an agent was that I couldn't afford an imagination anymore. No answer to my question? He said. Now is as good a time as any to see if I've got any imagination left, I said. Give me a minute or two. Take all the time you want, he said. So I projected myself into the situation he described, and what was left of my imagination gave me a corrosively cynical answer. There is every chance, I said, that I would have become a sort of Nazi Edgar Guest, writing a daily column of optimistic doggerel for daily papers around the world. And, as senility set in, the sunset of life, as they say, I might even come to believe what my couplets said, that everything was probably all for the best. I shrugged. Would I have shot anybody? I doubt it. Would I have organized a bomb plot? That's more of a possibility. But I've heard a lot of bombs go off in my time, and they've never impressed me as much as a way to get things done. One thing I can guarantee you, I would never have written a play again. That skill, such as it was, is lost. The only chance of my doing something really violent in favor of truth or justice or what have you, I said to my blue fairy godmother, would lie in my going homicidally insane. That could happen. In the situation you suggest, I might suddenly run amok with a deadly weapon down a peaceful street on an ordinary day. But whether the killing I did would improve the world much would be a matter of dumb luck, pure and simple. Have I answered your question honestly enough for you? I asked him. Yes. Thank you, he said. Classify me as a Nazi, I said tiredly. Classify away. Hang me if you think it would tend to raise the general level of morality. This life is no great treasure. I have no post-war plans. I only want you to understand how little we can do for you, he said. I see you do understand. How little? I said. A false identity, a few red herrings, transportation to wherever you might conceivably start a new life, he said. Some cash, not much, but some. Cash? I said. How was the cash value of my services arrived at? A matter of custom, he said. A custom going back to at least the Civil War. Oh? I said. Private's pay, he said. On my say-so, you're entitled to it for the period from when we met in the Tiergarten to the present. That's very generous, I said. Generosity doesn't amount to much in this business, he said. The real good agents aren't interested in money at all. Would it make any difference for you if we gave you the back pay of a brigadier general?
No, I said.
Or if we paid you nothing at all?
No difference, I said.
It's almost never money, he said.
Or patriotism either.
What is it then? I said.
Each person has to answer that question for himself, said Wirtanen. Generally speaking, espionage offers each spy an opportunity to go crazy in a way he finds irresistible.
Interesting, I said emptily.
He clapped his hands to break the mood. Now then, he said, about transportation. Where to?
Tahiti? I said.
If you say so, he said. I suggest New York. You can lose yourself there without any trouble, and there's plenty of work if you want it.
All right, New York, I said.
Let's get your passport picture taken. You'll be on a plane out of here inside of 3 hours, he said. We crossed the deserted parade ground together, dust devils spinning here and there. It was my fancy to think of the dust devils as the spooks of former cadets at the school, killed in war, returning now to whirl and dance on the parade ground alone, to dance in as unmilitary a fashion as they damn well pleased. When I told you there were only 3 people who knew about your coded broadcasts, said Wirtanen.
What about it? I said.
You didn't ask who the 3rd one was, he said.
Would it be anybody I'd ever heard of? I said.
Yes, he said. He's dead now, I'm sorry to say. You used to attack him regularly in your broadcasts.
Oh? I said.
The man you called Franklin Delano Rosenfeld, said Wirtanen. He used to listen to you gleefully every night.